Morning. Well, the drums of war continue to beat. I saw something just a bit ago said that majority of U.S. public supports implementing a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I'm not sure if everybody in that survey understood the implications of what that would mean. Surveys, man, I don't know if you've ever been called for a survey. I've been called for a couple, and I try to actually take the time, if I can, to answer those questions, just because the sample size is actually fairly low considering how many people are in the U.S. And so your response actually matters. Like it's going to be weighted, proportionally pretty heavily into the final calculation. So if you ever do get called on a survey and you actually have an opinion on things, try and take the time, because your opinion does matter, and those polls actually are looked at by policymakers. But the couple times that I have, the way questions are worded, and having been a sociology major in undergrad, you do talk a little bit about that just in basic kind of research, principles. The way you word questions can really skew the results of your survey. Now, if you're in good faith, trying to word things as neutrally as possible to get an actual fair representation of how people feel, that's one thing. But of course, polls are paid for by political activists all the time, and so you can definitely kind of skew the way the responses sort of hash out based on how you ask the questions. And there was one time in the polls I was arguing with the pollster, which was dumb because they don't make the questions, but it's just ultimately it's I don't have confidence based on the way these questions are being asked that my opinion is going to be represented accurately, or that if I answer them honestly, it's going to actually be used to advocate for things that I don't want based on the way you're asking a question. One of them was about school funding, and it was just really you can't argue with the idea that we should fund schools, right? And so the way they asked the questions, it kind of implied that, well, if I didn't support the proposed policy position, then I didn't support funding schools, or something like that. It's just stupid. Nevertheless, I digress. So, the American public apparently supports implementing no-fly zone, which basically means they support going to war with Russia, which, yikes. Yikes. And apparently Poland's looking at sending some surplus fighters to Ukraine, which, and that puts Russia in the position, it's are they going to wait for the Ukrainians to actually receive these, or are they going to start trying to destroy them preemptively, right? And if they start launching attacks into Poland, well, that, triggers, what is it called? Article 5, I think, the NATO treaty. An attack on one is an attack on all, and are we now in a shooting war with the Russians, which, again, yikes, right? And so I guess the question is, are we facing some kind of total collapse here, right? And that's always in the cards. I know I've mentioned previously, the period I grew up in, post Cold War, is just kind of this weird blip in the broad sweep of history, which was, dominated by, ugly, violence and strife, and great power competition, all that sort of thing. And so, we're kind of getting back to normal in a certain respect. It's just the problem is, we've got nukes now, which is a problem, right? Somebody was asking online, a friend said, hey, where I can get some iodine tablets, and in jest, but the funny thing was, I immediately said, well, you can get them for $20 on Amazon, because I'd been looking that day, and hearing that, their governments are actually stocking up on potassium iodine pills, and, you know, other sorts of things to mitigate nuclear fallout, which, you know, welcome back to the Cold War era, I guess. But, yeah, I mean, I was hearing it and thinking it, and so were other people I'm talking to, you know, like, wow, you know, I mean, if we actually start having some kind of limited nuclear exchange or a full-out nuclear war, like, what are we going to do? FEMA's actually got a map, like a heat map for all the different potential targets, depending on how many warheads get launched, between, like, you know, 500 and 3,000 or whatever. You can go on their website and see what all the potential targets are. You know, and it's interesting because, you know, in the lower level strike, it's mostly concentrated at, you know, where our current ICBM installations are, and a lot of those are in the interior of the country, you know, like around the Dakotas, Nebraska, Montana, that sort of thing. You know, so if you're going to launch a limited strike, you're going to try and take out, you know, the opposing side's ability to respond. But, I mean, if you have a full kind of strategic blowout with, you know, the entire stockpile being fired off, I mean, you're looking for, well, to wipe out not just their ability to fire back, but inflict as much collateral damage on the country as possible, and that's population centers. And depending on the yield of the weapon, I mean, you're looking at, you know, 20 some warheads or something like that being allocated to major metropolitan areas like Chicago, New York, LA, because the actual blast radius, never mind the fallout plume, the blast radius is actually relatively small, considering, like, how much space somewhere like, you know, the greater LA metro area sprawls out into. So if you really want to, like, wipe out that city, you gotta drop a lot of warheads on it, even the high yield ones. Yikes. There was a game I played in college. It was called Defcon, and God, it was just this eerie game. And it basically, you go from Defcon 5 to Defcon 1. Defcon 1 means we're in a hot shooting war with nuclear weapons. And so you're kind of strategically moving your, you know, air and naval forces around the map, depending on who your adversary was, and trying to get in a position where you can launch a first strike when you go to Defcon 1 to wipe out their ability to respond. And then you score points based on the number of mega deaths, or, you know, however many, was it 1,000 million people or whatever you're killing. So, you know, you try to prioritize locating their missile silos and their ballistic submarines to take those out first, and then use whatever you got left to lay out their cities. And this is a really eerie game, and the music in the background, like, I mean, it's already kind of spooky to begin with, but as the death toll rises, like, and you get these, like, haunting, like, just kind of sounds in the background of, like, you know, small children weeping and things like that. And I mean, you definitely come away from the game like, oh yeah, you know, only had 30 million people die. You know, I totally dominated the Russians that round, because, you know, I basically killed off all 150 million of them, and I only lost 30 million people, right? Yeah, there's no winners in a full-scale nuclear war, which is kind of the point of the game, right? And what can you do, right? All you can do is laugh. Otherwise, you cry. Because it's sad, you know. And I mean, you look at your local area, you know, and Portland's not a huge city, even by U.S. standards. But there's, you know, military targets inside the city of Portland. And again, in a full exchange, like, you know, the suburbs even are going to get hit. And so you got to look at things like where the prevailing winds are, and, you know, what your evacuation route potentially is going to be. And then think about, you know, things like air filtration, you know, if you've got, you know, radioactive particulates in the air, and then things like potassium iodine tablets, which are really only going to protect your thyroid, right? Never mind, you know, your bones or anything else that's going to absorb radioactive isotopes. You know, some of which are, you know, like, was it cesium, I think, is a really nasty one. Anyway, I'm not a chemist, but if you really want to be depressed, read up on it. And I mean, short of that, if we don't, pull the trigger and end up in a shooting war with the Russians, we're in this position now where the SWIFT payment system's basically been locked down in Russia, and so you can't send or receive money in or out of Russia, and they're maybe trying to do something cooperative with the Chinese to keep payment processing within their own geographic area running. And it really highlights just to the degree to which the powers that be can just shut down your ability to exist. And we saw that kind of small scale cancel culture stuff, even as far back as was it 2015, 2016? Anybody who was kind of paying attention on political YouTube with Carl Benjamin, or Sargon of Akkad was his handle. He's since kind of left that by the wayside, but and there was the controversy with him being kicked off Patreon, which was kind of a crowdfunding platform, and they didn't like the things that he was saying or doing, and so hey, guess what, your livelihood is gone, right? And I mean, that's the thing. And there's other people who are associated with the Proud Boys and other kind of persona non grata in society, public enemy number one. It's like, hey, guess what? You're not allowed to have bank accounts anymore, like personal or business accounts. Like you are no longer allowed to deal in anything other than cash. Which good luck making that work, because there are just so many things that you can't pay with cash anymore. Now cash is probably going to go away entirely. What do you do, absent, the ability to transact with people, right? If suddenly the powers that be, for whatever reason, justly or not, but, decide that, no, we're going to unperson you, and you're no longer allowed to speak in any kind of public forum. You're no longer allowed to transact with anybody or engage in any profitable venture to be able to support yourself and your family, right? And people point to things like cryptocurrency, and I think cryptocurrency is great. And if you're not educated on the subject, and I'm not super educated on it, but done my own limited investigation, it's certainly promising. Nothing's 100% secure, but I mean, you think about, especially in light of inflation and just the wild inflation numbers we're seeing, and then with the potential war and fuel shortages and everything that's going to do to the dollar, or the petrodollar, right, is the basis of the kind of world economic system. If we're actually kind of fracturing international trade and walling off Asia, or a large portion of it, right? What are dollars going to actually be worth in the future? And then again, if you get locked out of Visa, MasterCard, SWIFT payment banking system, right? What are you left with? Maybe crypto, right? And fiat currency, or currency by decree by the state, right? I mean, it's not really based on anything either. I mean, maybe petroleum, is kind of the petrodollar is kind of the basis of our currency now. But people talk about crypto being a Ponzi scheme, and there's definitely a lot of shit coins out there, right? The cryptocurrency, there's a lot of scams, and it's kind of like the Wild West, very reminiscent of the early internet. But I mean, there's some well-established stuff that even very, very serious investors are getting into in the millions and billions of dollars. And the time to get in was 2017 or earlier, but I mean, it's not too late. And I'm not a financial advisor. Watch any crypto video, they'll tell you I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't buy or sell advice, but make an informed decision about your economic future, because things are looking dicey, and I'm not crazy about having a whole bunch of cash to sit on, but Not that I have a ton, but I don't know where I'd put it. And you try to kind of divvy it up into different places and hope that, if you're diversified enough, like something of what you have will see you through if we do see some kind of big systemic collapse. 2008 might end up being like child's play. We don't know. Nobody thought there'd be a global pandemic. Nobody thought that Russia had invaded Ukraine, and yet here we are. And it's kind of like that movie Don't Look Up, right? And I'm actually not a big fan of that movie. I tried watching it. I got through most of it. And it was irritatingly preachy to me. I get what they're trying to say. But, they do have a point. And, I think the biggest point is, the folks that are in control, and it doesn't matter which party they're in, but the folks that are in control are going to do everything they can up until the very last moment to conceal the fact from you that something is going very badly. And they want you to continue to be a good little drone and continue to work and produce for them until, the entire system burns down and you're left kind of, wondering what happened. So pay attention, and the people that are in the know, they're making moves and doing things to protect themselves. And there's no reason that, we, the little people, can't do similar things to kind of prepare for the worst. So, and again, this wasn't planning on this being another prepper video, but, when you're talking about, some sort of apocalyptic Armageddon scenario, you could either just say, well, I'll die, or think about, what is it that I'm going to do to survive, and think about your hierarchy and needs, and, how you're going to feed and water yourself and provide, shelter and warmth and, the ability to, produce some sort of ongoing sustenance for you. Most of us are just, would not have the skill set for that. And we live in the most heavily armed nation in the world. And I think there's a lot of people whose plan is, well, I got my guns and I'm going to go take what I need from the other people. Good luck to you. I think a lot of those people are going to weed themselves out in pretty short order if we do have some kind of crazy thing light off. Last time when I was talking about, what do we do if the Russians launch a missile? And it's easy to say, it's like, well, if it's just targeted at an isolated military target, maybe we'll, just have some kind of proportional response, or, we'll slow things down and figure out what we're doing. But, if you look into what the effects of an EMP are and how vulnerable the grid is, and the large, difficult to replace infrastructure that could be critically damaged in some kind of attack like that, and you have to consider the possibility that if we had a missile launched over the continental United States, then all or most of the nation could have the power grid knocked out for months or longer. And if it's in the dead of winter and the water pumps aren't pumping and the gas pumps aren't pumping, right, and the power's not on, how are you going to provide for your family, right? Do you even have enough gas in your tank to get somewhere where maybe the power is on, right? Or is your car even going to be running if it gets EMP'd? If you've got an older pickup that's all analog versus, a newer, a foreign or domestic made car that's, very computer reliant, is that going to survive an EMP? Maybe. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how things shape up. I don't know. Good luck to you all. Take care of yourselves, take care of your family, and I guess rather than just sit in fear, I guess cultivate relationships, and that's something I could do better myself. What it's really going to come down to is, do you have people around you that you can trust to watch your back while you're sleeping? if it comes down to it, and who have resources and skill sets that are going to help you survive, and who have something to offer a community when we get down to like the subsistence level, if we get bombed back to the, you know, to the steam age, if we're lucky. I don't know. You know, and resilience and self-sufficiency, I mean, even under good circumstances, you know, people find a lot of rewarding things out of that, whether it's, you know, like gardening or brewing. You know, I mean, if you know how to make beer, man, I mean, people are going to want to drink beer even after the apocalypse. You know, I mean, it's a valuable commodity, and it's chock full of calories if you know how to make it, and it's, you know, a good way to preserve food, or if you can, you know, or pickle stuff. Like, again, you know, like fermentation, like that, you know, helped humanity survive thousands of years without things like refrigeration. So, I mean, there's all kinds of resources out there, you know, and again, you know, it's not something where you're going to be able to just like look it up on the internet, because the internet's going to be off for, you know, maybe never coming back, at least in its current incarnation, until our great-great-grandchildren rebuild. So, you know, like paperback books, I don't know. Yeah, crazy stuff. Hopefully uplifting as always. It's been fun. See you on the next one.